Millionaire discovers ex-wife and hidden triplets in shelter. What happens next will transform his life. Follow this incredible journey of redemption as a tech billionaire's world is turned upside down when he volunteers at a homeless shelter during a blizzard. Like and comment if you've ever had an unexpected encounter that changed everything. Alexander Grant stared at the Forbes magazine cover featuring his own face, the headline, "Tech's Newest Billionaire," seeming to mock him as he sat alone in his penthouse on Christmas Eve. The snow fell silently outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago's skyline a glittering backdrop against the darkening winter sky. Alexander swirled the amber liquid in his crystal tumbler, the $500 scotch as tasteless to him now as water. His penthouse, all 6,000 square feet of it, was an architectural masterpiece featured in design magazines. Minimalist furniture in muted grays and whites, sleek glass tables, and abstract art worth millions adorned the space. What it lacked were personal photographs, Christmas decorations, or any sign that a human being actually lived here rather than merely existed. The intercom buzzed, interrupting the hollow silence. Alexander sighed, setting down his drink on the Italian marble countertop. "Yes?" he answered, his voice echoing slightly in the empty space. "Mr. Grant, it's Diane." His executive assistant's voice sounded tinny through the speaker. "I'm finalizing tomorrow's schedule and wanted to confirm you'll be appearing at the company holiday party at 7 p.m. Alexander glanced at his watch, a limited edition Patek Philippe worth more than most cars. It was already 8 p.m. on Christmas Eve, and Diane was still working. He felt a pang of something resembling guilt. "You're still at the office?" he asked. There was a brief pause. "Just wrapping up a few things before heading home to my family." Family. The word hung in the air. "Go home, Diane. Whatever it is can wait until after Christmas." "But the holiday party tomorrow?" "Cancel my appearance," Alexander said decisively. "Tell them I've come down with something." "But sir, you're the CEO. Everyone's expecting you to give the year-end address and announce the bonuses." Alexander pinched the bridge of his nose. At 40, he sometimes felt twice that age. "Have the CFO do it. That's what I pay him for." "Yes, sir," Diane replied, her disappointment evident even through the intercom. "Oh, and Mr. Hayes called again. He said the Amsterdam acquisition is finalized. He left a voice message." "Thank you, Diane. Now go home." Alexander walked back to his leather couch and picked up his phone. Victor Hayes, his business partner since founding Grant Hayes Technologies 15 years ago, had left 3 messages. He pressed play on the first one. "Alex, we did it, you magnificent bastard. Amsterdam is ours. 15 billion in new infrastructure, 4,000 new employees, and a foothold in the European market. Call me when you get this. We need to celebrate." Victor's excited voice filled the empty penthouse. Alexander should have felt something. Pride, excitement, satisfaction. Instead, he felt nothing. Just the same emptiness that had been growing inside him for years. His phone pinged with a notification. Opening it, he saw the company's social media accounts were being flooded with negative comments. Frowning, Alexander tapped on the trending hashtag, #Grant Hayes destroys homes. An article appeared with pictures of protesters outside a building in Chicago's West Side. The headline read, "Tech Giant Displaces Homeless Shelter for New Office Complex." Alexander scrolled through the comments, his frown deepening. Their new development project was apparently replacing a shelter that housed over 200 people. The PR nightmare unfolded before his eyes. Pictures of families with children holding signs, elderly residents being interviewed by local news, accusations of corporate greed during the holidays. His phone rang. It was Jessica Lawson, his head of public relations. "Have you seen the situation online?" she asked without preamble. "I'm looking at it now," Alexander replied. "How bad is it?" "It's gaining traction. Local news has picked it up, and it's starting to spread to national outlets. The timing couldn't be worse. Christmas, record cold temperatures, and we're displacing vulnerable people." Alexander stood and walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered city. "What do you suggest?" "Damage control. We need you to make a public appearance showing support for the homeless community. Something visible and immediate." "Such as?" "Volunteer at another shelter during the blizzard that's coming. We'll have photographers document it, release a statement about your personal commitment to finding solutions for the displaced residents, and announce a donation. Alexander grimaced. He hated PR stunts. Can't we just make a large donation anonymously? Money without a face doesn't generate positive. Press, Mr. Grant. We need your image out there, showing you care. Alexander thought of his empty schedule for the next few days. He had planned to work through the holidays as usual. No family waited for him. No Christmas dinner was being prepared. No presents sat under a tree. Fine, he relented. Find a shelter, set it up, but keep it low-key. I don't want a media circus. Thank you, sir. I'll have details to you by morning. After hanging up, Alexander walked to his home office and opened his laptop. The screen displayed his investment portfolio, billions in assets, properties around the world, enough money for several lifetimes. He closed it and opened his personal photos instead, scrolling back through years of business functions and product launches. He stopped on a folder he rarely opened, dated 7 years earlier. Inside were photos of a woman with warm brown eyes and a smile that had once made his heart race. Sophia, his ex-wife. In the photos, they looked happy, hiking in Colorado, at their small wedding, building their first office, before the company took off, before he started missing dinners, then weekends, then weeks at a time, before she told him she couldn't compete with his ambition anymore. Alexander's finger hovered over the delete button. 7 years was long enough to hold on to memories. With a quick tap, he erased the folder and closed his laptop. Walking back to the window, he watched the snow intensify. The weather report warned of a historic blizzard approaching Chicago, set to hit hardest on Christmas Day. He took another sip of his expensive scotch, feeling nothing as it burned down his throat. Little did Alexander know that the shelter his team had chosen would lead him face to face with the past he'd tried so hard to forget, and a future he never imagined possible. The Hope Harbor shelter on Chicago's west side was a flurry of activity as volunteers prepared Christmas dinner for its residents. Outside, the blizzard had intensified, wind howling against the windows while snow piled in drifts against the building. Inside, the atmosphere was warm, despite the threadbare decorations. A donated Christmas tree adorned with handmade ornaments, paper snowflakes hanging from the ceiling, and strings of mismatched lights, casting a soft glow over the communal dining area. Alexander Grant stood awkwardly in the entryway, brushing snow from his expensive cashmere coat. Behind him, Jessica from PR was giving instructions to the photographer she'd brought along. Just candid shots of Mr. Grant serving food and interacting with residents, she whispered. Nothing that looks staged. Alexander suppressed an eye roll. The entire thing was staged, and they both knew it. A tall black man with silver-streaked dreadlocks approached them, extending his hand. Welcome to Hope Harbor. I'm Darius Washington, the manager here. His handshake was firm, his eyes sharp and assessing, as they took in Alexander's designer clothes and the photographer hovering nearby. Alexander Grant, he replied. Thank you for accommodating us on such short notice. Particularly during a blizzard, Darius added with a hint of challenge in his voice. Your PR team was quite insistent. Alexander had the decency to look slightly embarrassed. To be honest, I'd rather write a check, but apparently that doesn't photograph well. To his surprise, Darius chuckled. At least you're honest about it. Most corporate types pretend they're here out of the goodness of their hearts. He gestured for Alexander to follow. Come on, I'll give you the quick tour before putting you to work. Fair warning, we don't treat billionaires any differently than other volunteers here. As they walked through the shelter, Alexander was struck by how many families with children were present. He'd expected mostly single adults, not toddlers playing with worn toys or teenagers helping set tables. We're at capacity with the storm, Darius explained, noticing his surprise. About 40% of our residents are families, many with single parents who lost housing during the pandemic and never recovered. The rest are a mix: elderly, veterans, people with health issues, those between jobs. Alexander nodded, genuinely interested despite himself. What's your background? Before the shelter, I mean. Corporate law, Darius replied, surprising him. 15 years at Winston and Pierce downtown, made partner, had the corner office, the whole package. What happened? I took on a pro bono case involving this shelter, which was facing closure. Somewhere along the way, I realized I was on the wrong side of the conference table. Darius smiled ruefully. Walked away from a 7-figure salary, never regretted it for a minute. They reached the kitchen area, bustling with volunteers preparing food. Darius handed Alexander an apron. We'll start you on the serving line. Turkey or mashed potatoes? Either is fine, Alexander replied, finding himself strangely impressed by this former lawyer who'd walked away from wealth for purpose. Darius pointed toward the serving station. Check in with our program director. She's organizing the volunteers. Alexander turned in the direction Darius indicated and felt the world stop. Standing across the room, clipboard in hand and directing volunteers with quiet authority, was a woman he would have recognized anywhere. Sophia. 7 years had changed her. The long hair he remembered was now cut into a practical bob, and she wore no makeup. Her clothing was simple, jeans, boots, and a forest green sweater with the shelter's logo, but her warm brown eyes and the determined set of her chin were exactly as he remembered. For a terrifying moment, Alexander considered leaving before she saw him, but as if sensing his presence, Sophia looked up. Their eyes locked across the crowded room. The clipboard she was holding clattered to the floor, drawing attention from nearby volunteers. The noise seemed to break the spell, and Sophia quickly bent to retrieve it, her face flushed. Alexander felt rooted to the spot as she straightened and walked toward him, her expression shifting from shock to wariness. Alexander, she said when she reached him, her voice controlled but with a slight tremor. This is unexpected. Sophia, he managed. I had no idea you were... Sophia, Darius called, approaching them. Do we have enough volunteers for the children's area? And do the girls need anything for their section? This storm isn't letting up anytime soon. Sophia tore her gaze away from Alexander. We're covered, thanks. The girls are helping the younger children make snowflakes. Alexander felt a jolt at the mention of the girls. Before he could process this, a loud crash from the kitchen demanded Darius's attention, and he hurried away. Sophia turned back to Alexander, her composure regained. We should talk privately, she said, gesturing toward a hallway. My office is this way. As Alexander followed her through the dining hall, conversations hushed momentarily as residents and volunteers noticed him, or more specifically, noticed his obvious wealth amid their modest surroundings. He felt conspicuous in his tailored clothes and Italian shoes, like a peacock among sparrows. Sophia's office was small, but organized, with filing cabinets against one wall and a desk covered in paperwork. Children's artwork decorated the walls alongside framed social work certifications and community awards. A window looked out at the worsening blizzard, snow now falling so heavily it obscured the buildings across the street. Alexander's eyes were drawn to her desk, where several framed photos stood. He froze when he spotted a family portrait, Sophia surrounded by 3 little girls, maybe 5 or 6 years old. 3 identical little girls with his amber eyes. Your daughters? He asked, his voice barely audible above the howling wind outside. Sophia closed the door before answering. Our daughters, Alexander, are triplets. He felt dizzy, reaching for the back of a chair to steady himself. That's not possible. We've been divorced for 7 years. I found out I was pregnant 2 weeks after the divorce was finalized, she said quietly. They'll be 7 next month. Alexander stared at the photo, unable to tear his eyes away from the 3 identical faces. Each had Sophia's delicate features, but his distinctive amber eyes and the cleft in the chin that had marked generations of Grantmen. There was no question they were his. Why didn't you tell me? He asked, a storm of emotions making his voice rough. I tried, Sophia replied, her own voice tight with old pain. I called your office 3 times in the first month. Your assistant said you were too busy to take personal calls and were overseas expanding the business. After the 3rd attempt, I decided our children wouldn't spend their lives being too inconvenient for your schedule. Alexander remembered that time, the frenetic push into international markets, sleeping on planes, the exhilaration of watching his company valuation soar. Had Diane mentioned calls from Sophia? He couldn't recall. What are their names? He asked, still staring at the photo on the desk. Lily, Maya, and Zoe, Sophia answered, her expression softening slightly. They're amazing, Alexander. Smart, kind, completely different personalities, despite looking identical. Before Alexander could respond, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the room into gray shadows. Emergency lights kicked on in the hallway as voices raised in alarm throughout the shelter. A rapid knock at the door was followed by Darius poking his head in. "Power's out across the neighborhood. We need all hands to calm the residents and distribute emergency supplies." Sophia was already moving toward the door. "I'll be right there." As she followed Darius out, she paused and looked back at Alexander, who stood stunned by her desk. "We're not finished with this conversation," she said. "But right now, there are 200 people out there who need help." Sophia's office felt too small, the walls closing in as Alexander stared at the family portrait. The emergency lights cast an eerie glow through the doorway, illuminating just enough for him to study the faces of the 3 little girls, his daughters. The thought landed like a physical weight on his chest. Beyond the office, the shelter had erupted into organized chaos. Staff members distributed flashlights and emergency blankets while reassuring anxious residents. Alexander could hear Sophia's calm voice directing volunteers in the hallway, her natural leadership evident even in crisis. He forced himself to look away from the photo and take in the rest of Sophia's office. Children's artwork covered one wall, crayon drawings signed in careful handwriting, Lily, Maya, and Zoe. A bookshelf held social work textbooks and family therapy resources alongside framed degrees. On her desk, a small laptop sat beside a pile of grant applications and case files. Alexander picked up another framed photo, this one of the triplets sitting on a park bench, their identical faces scrunched in laughter. He felt a deep ache for all the moments he'd missed. Sophia returned, closing the door behind her. In the dim light from the emergency backup system, her face looked tired but resolute. "Darius has things under control for now," she said. "The generator should power the essential areas, but the heat might become an issue if the outage lasts too long." Alexander set down the photo. "How long have you worked here?" 5 years, she replied. "I started as a volunteer while finishing my social work degree. Now, I'm the program director." "And you live?" "In the transitional housing section attached to the shelter. It's part of my compensation." Sophia leaned against her desk. "But that's not what you want to know, is it?" Alexander shook his head. "Why didn't you try harder to reach me? A letter, an email, something more than phone calls to my assistant?" Sophia's expression hardened. "You made your priorities crystal clear when we were married, Alexander. The company always came first. Always." She gestured at the photos. "I wasn't going to subject my daughters to a father who viewed them as an inconvenience." "Our daughters," Alexander corrected, his voice rising slightly. "You made that decision for all of us. I had a right to know." "Yes, you did," Sophia admitted, surprising him. "Maybe I was wrong not to try harder, but I was 29, newly divorced, suddenly pregnant with triplets, and frankly, terrified." Her voice caught slightly. "The last thing you said to me before I walked out was that children would be a complication to your 5-year expansion plan." Alexander winced, remembering the conversation. They had been discussing their future, and Sophia had mentioned wanting to start a family. His response had been cold, calculating, all business. "That was about hypothetical children," he said weakly. "If I'd known—" "Would it really have changed anything?" Sophia interrupted. "Would you have put the brakes on Grant Hayes to attend 3 a.m. feedings and doctor appointments? Would you have made room in your expansion strategy for triplets, Alexander?" He wanted to say yes, to insist he would have been there, but the truth stuck in his throat. 7 years ago, at the height of his ambition, would he really have chosen fatherhood over the empire he was building? "I don't know," he admitted finally, "but I deserved the chance to try." Sophia's expression softened slightly at his honesty. "Yes, you did. And the girls deserved a father who wanted to be in their lives," she sighed. "We all made mistakes." Alexander looked again at the photos, studying each identical face. "Tell me about them, please." For the first time since he'd arrived, Sophia smiled genuinely. "Lily is the oldest by 2 minutes. She's our little leader, protective, organized, always looking out for her sisters. She's cautious with new people, but fiercely loyal once she trusts you." Alexander nodded, drinking in every detail. "Maya is our dreamer," Sophia continued. She lives in a world of stories and art. Her room is filled with drawings and books. She's the most sensitive of the three. And Zoe? Alexander prompted. Zoe is our problem solver. She can take apart and reassemble almost anything, always asking why and how questions that I can't answer. Sophia gave him a pointed look. She has your analytical mind. Alexander felt a surge of pride followed immediately by regret for all he'd missed. 6 years, he said quietly. First steps, first words, first day of school. They're still so young, Sophia offered. There's still time if what? If you actually want to be in their lives, Alexander. Really in their lives, not just when it's convenient or when you remember between business deals. Her voice was firm. These are children, not acquisitions. They need consistency, not grand gestures followed by disappearances. Before Alexander could respond, a small knock came at the office door. It opened slightly, and a child's face peered in, amber eyes wide with curiosity beneath a fringe of dark bangs. Mom, Darius said to tell you the hot chocolate is ready for everyone, the little girl said, her eyes darting curiously to Alexander. Thank you, Zoe, Sophia replied. I'll be right there. Alexander couldn't breathe as he found himself face to face with his daughter for the first time. Zoe studied him with an intensity that was eerily familiar. He'd seen the same expression in the mirror while solving complex problems. Who are you? Zoe asked directly, unafraid. Alexander looked to Sophia, unsure how to answer. She gave a slight shake of her head. Not yet. I'm Mr. Grant, he said finally. A volunteer. Zoe's head tilted slightly. You have eyes like mine, she observed, before disappearing back into the hallway. When the door closed, Alexander turned to Sophia, his voice unsteady. I want to meet them, properly. We need to be careful how we do this, Sophia replied. Let's get through this emergency first, then we'll talk about how, and if, we introduce you as their father. The shelter's community room had been transformed into an impromptu gathering space as the blizzard raged outside. Emergency lights cast a warm glow over residents and volunteers huddled in small groups, sharing blankets and hot chocolate. Battery-powered lanterns sat on tables, creating islands of light in the dim room. Alexander stood near the entrance, watching the scene with newfound awareness. His eyes scanned the room until he found them, 3 identical little girls in matching blue sweaters, moving through the crowd with purpose. Even from a distance, he could see how different they were in their mannerisms, despite their identical appearance. Quite a sight, isn't it? Darius appeared beside Alexander, handing him a steaming cup. People coming together during hardship. Alexander accepted the drink absently, his attention fixed on the triplets. I never realized places like this were so organized. Darius followed his gaze. Sophia's girls are something special. Been here since they were babies, growing up among the community. They know this place better than I do. Alexander watched as one of the girls, Lily, he guessed from Sophia's description, organized a group of younger children into a circle for a game. Her movements were confident, her instructions clear. Across the room, another triplet sat cross-legged, surrounded by smaller children as she gestured animatedly, clearly telling a story that had her audience captivated. Maya, the dreamer. Where's the third one? Alexander asked, trying to sound casual. Darius chuckled. Zoe? Probably trying to fix the generator again. Kid's got a mind for mechanics that's downright uncanny. Come on, I'll show you. Alexander followed Darius through a service door and down a hallway to a utility room. There, kneeling beside a large generator with a flashlight held between her teeth, was his third daughter. A middle-aged maintenance worker sat beside her, looking equal parts amused and impressed as the small girl pointed at various components. How's it going, Marcus? Darius asked. The maintenance man shook his head in wonder. This kid knows more about engines than most adults I've met. She figured out why the backup system isn't powering the east wing. Zoe removed the flashlight from her mouth. The connection is loose here, she explained matter-of-factly. And this part is corroded. It's interrupting the circuit. Alexander felt a surge of pride that almost overwhelmed him. He stepped forward before he could think better of it. Maybe I can help, he offered, kneeling down beside Zoe. I used to rebuild engines with my grandfather. Zoe regarded him with mild suspicion, her amber eyes, his eyes, narrowing slightly. "You're the man from Mom's office, the one with eyes like mine." Alexander nodded, acutely aware of Darius watching this interaction with interest. "I am. I'm Alexander." "I'm Zoe," she replied seriously, as though they were colleagues meeting at a conference. "Do you know about generators?" "A little," Alexander admitted. "May I?" He gestured to the flashlight. Zoe handed it over, and they bent together over the generator. Alexander quickly identified the problem, a corroded connection, just as Zoe had diagnosed. Working together in comfortable silence, they cleaned the corrosion and tightened the loose wire. "Try it now, Marcus," Alexander suggested. The maintenance man flipped a switch, and the generator roared to life. Lights flickered on in the hallway as power returned to the east wing. Zoe broke into a grin that transformed her serious face, making her look her age. "We fixed it!" she exclaimed, giving Alexander an unexpected high five. "You're smart, mister. My mom says I get my brain for fixing things from my dad. But he lives far away making computers." Alexander felt like he'd been punched in the chest. He managed a strained smile as Zoe gathered her tools and skipped off to share news of their success. When she was out of earshot, Darius gave Alexander a curious look. "You all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I need some air," Alexander said, heading for the nearest exit. The bitter cold hit him like a slap as he stepped into the shelter's small courtyard, now piled high with snow. He gulped in freezing air, his mind racing. "My dad lives far away making computers." The innocence of the statement made it all the more painful. Sophia had told them something about him, not that he'd abandoned them, not that he didn't want them, but that he was away working. She'd kept the door open for him, a door he hadn't even known existed. "She doesn't know you're her father." Alexander turned to find Sophia standing in the doorway, arms wrapped around herself against the cold. "None of them do," she continued. "I told them their father works with technology and lives far away, that he's very smart, like them." "Why?" Alexander asked. "Why not tell them I didn't want to be involved?" Sophia stepped into the snow beside him. "Because I wanted them to have the option of loving you someday. Children shouldn't carry their parents' mistakes." "They're extraordinary, Sophia," Alexander said quietly. "All three of them." "Yes, they are," she agreed. "And they deserve a father who will be there consistently, not just when it's convenient. Can you be that person, Alexander? Really be that person?" Alexander looked back at the building, where through a window he could see Zoe proudly explaining something to her sisters. For the first time in years, he felt something crack open within him, a door to a future he'd never imagined. "I want to try," he said simply. "Will you let me?" Sophia studied him for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Tomorrow," she said. "We'll tell them tomorrow, if the storm has passed. But, Alexander," her voice hardened slightly, "this isn't a business deal you can walk away from if it gets difficult. These are little girls with hearts that can break." Christmas morning in Sophia's apartment was modest but warm. The small space in the transitional housing wing connected to the shelter consisted of a combined living room and kitchen, with 2 small bedrooms beyond. A tabletop Christmas tree adorned with handmade ornaments sat in the corner, colored lights blinking cheerfully. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind a transformed world of pristine white drifts, visible through the frost-rimmed windows. Alexander arrived precisely at 9, having trudged through snow from his hotel 6 blocks away. He'd spent most of the night awake, alternating between anxiety and a strange, unfamiliar excitement. In the early hours, he'd ordered gifts online with expedited delivery, only to second-guess himself and cancel most of them, keeping only 3 simple science kits. He now stood awkwardly in Sophia's doorway, the presents tucked under his arm, wearing the most casual clothes he owned, which still looked expensive compared to the shelter's surroundings. "You made it," Sophia said, surprise evident in her voice as she checked her watch. "And you're early." "The sidewalks are barely plowed," Alexander replied, brushing snow from his coat. He held up the wrapped packages. "I brought something for them, but if it's too much, leave them by the door for now," Sophia interrupted gently. "Let's focus on the introduction first. Gifts can complicate things." She led him into the living room, where the triplets sat in matching red and green pajamas, examining their modest Christmas presents from Sophia. The remains of pancake breakfast lay on plates on the small dining table. The girls looked up simultaneously as Alexander entered, their identical faces registering immediate recognition from their brief encounter the day before. "Girls," Sophia began, sitting on the coffee table facing them. "This is Mr. Grant. He helped at the shelter yesterday during the storm. He fixed the generator with me," Zoe supplied helpfully. Alexander's throat tightened at the simple statement. He managed a nod, unable to find his voice. "Yes, he did," Sophia agreed. "But there's something important I need to tell you about Mr. Grant." She took a deep breath. "Do you remember how we've talked about your father, how he works with technology and lives far away?" Three heads nodded in unison. "And you've noticed that Mr. Grant has the same color eyes that you do," Sophia continued carefully. "And the same chin," Maya observed quietly, touching her own cleft chin. Sophia nodded. "Yes, exactly. That's because—" She glanced at Alexander, who stood frozen by the couch. "Mr. Grant is your father." The silence that followed was absolute. Alexander could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears as three identical pairs of eyes widened, examining him with newfound intensity. Wesley, the artistic dreamer, spoke first. "Like a real dad? Not just someone who looks like us?" "A real dad," Alexander confirmed, finding his voice at last. He moved carefully to sit on the couch, still maintaining some distance. "I'm your biological father." Connor, always the protector, frowned deeply. His expression was a perfect miniature of Alexander's own when confronted with a problem. "If you're our dad, why haven't you ever visited us before? Don't you like us?" The direct question hit Alexander like a physical blow. He looked to Sophia, who nodded encouragingly. "I didn't know about you," Alexander said honestly, deciding that the girls deserved truth. "Your mother and I divorced before she knew she was expecting you. By the time she found out, I had moved overseas for work. We lost touch with each other." "Mom didn't tell you about us?" Zoe asked, her analytical mind immediately identifying the gap. "I tried," Sophia explained carefully, "but sometimes grown-ups make mistakes in how they communicate. I should have tried harder, and your father should have been easier to reach." Alexander marveled at her generosity in sharing the blame. "The important thing," he added, "is that I know now, and I want very much to be your father if you'll let me." The triplets exchanged glances, having one of those silent communications that only multiples seem capable of. Alexander watched in fascination as entire conversations seemed to pass between them without a word. Parker, the quietest and most thoughtful of the three, was the first to slide off the couch. He approached Alexander slowly, studying him with solemn amber eyes. "Can I call you Dad?" he asked simply. Alexander felt his chest constrict, emotion threatening to overwhelm him. He knelt down to meet his son's eyes. "I would like that more than anything." Parker considered this for a moment before stepping forward and wrapping his small arms around Alexander's neck. The simple gesture broke something open inside Alexander, and he found himself holding his son for the first time, blinking back tears. Maya joined them next, approaching with curious wonder. "Does this mean we get to know you now? For real?" "Yes," Alexander managed through the tightness in his throat. "It means I'll be part of your lives in every way I can be." Only Lily remained on the couch, watching cautiously. Sophia sat beside her, arm around her shoulders. "It's okay to need time, Lily," Sophia reassured her. "This is big news." The protective triplet twisted her hands together nervously. "If you're our dad," she asked Alexander directly, "are you going to take us away from Mom?" "No," Alexander answered Lily immediately, his voice firm. "Your mother is amazing. She's taken care of you all by herself for 6 years. We're going to work together now, but nothing will change how important she is." Relief washed over Lily's face. She studied Alexander for a long moment before sliding off the couch and approaching him with an extended hand. "Okay," she said solemnly, "but you have to promise not to leave again." Alexander shook his daughter's small hand, feeling the weight of the moment. "I promise, Lily, I'm here for good." The intimate family moment was interrupted by an urgent knock. Sophia opened the door to find Darius, his expression grave. "Sorry to interrupt your Christmas," he said, "but we have an emergency. The main water pipes burst in the east wing. The lower level is flooding, and we need to evacuate residents to the temporary shelter at the high school." "I'll be right there," Sophia said, already moving to get dressed. "I'll help," Alexander offered without hesitation. 20 minutes later, the shelter was in controlled chaos. Water pooled in the lower corridors, while volunteers formed human chains to move belongings and supplies to higher ground. Outside, city buses waited to transport residents to the temporary facility. Alexander, now in water-soaked shoes that had cost more than most shelter residents earned in a week, helped elderly residents navigate the slippery floors. The triplets had insisted on coming along and were now busy helping younger children gather their few possessions. "It's not just the storm damage," Darius explained to Alexander as they carried boxes of supplies up the stairs. "This building's infrastructure has been failing for months. We've been patching things together while fighting to secure funding." "How bad is it?" Alexander asked. Darius set down his box with a heavy sigh. "Bad. Our operating grant was cut by 30% this year. We've been operating on reserves, but those are nearly depleted. This flood might be the final blow." Alexander's business mind immediately began calculating. "What's your annual operating budget?" "About $1.2 million for everything. Staff, maintenance, programs, meals." Alexander reached for his phone. "I can transfer funds immediately to cover—" "Hold up," Darius Dale interrupted, raising a hand. "Money helps, but it's not just about a quick cash infusion. The whole system is broken. We need sustainable funding, building improvements, program development." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion at the entrance. A tall man in an immaculate wool coat strode in, looking completely out of place among the chaos. Alexander recognized him immediately. "Victor," he called, surprised to see his business partner. "What are you doing here?" Victor Hayes scanned the scene with barely disguised distaste before focusing on Alexander. "Looking for you. You've gone completely off-grid for 24 hours during a critical negotiation period. The Tokyo investors are waiting for your call, and you're—" He gestured around the shelter. "Playing Santa Claus." "There's an emergency here," Alexander explained, gesturing toward the flooding corridors. Victor's expression remained unmoved. "There's an emergency at the company, too. We're about to lose the Nakamura account if you don't personally intervene." Before Alexander could respond, the triplets appeared, helping an elderly woman with her belongings. Victor's eyes widened as he looked from the girls to Alexander and back again, clearly noting the resemblance. "What the hell?" he muttered. "Alex, who are these kids?" Alexander straightened, suddenly aware of how different his two worlds were. "Victor Hayes, meet Lily, Maya, and Zoe, my daughters." Victor's jaw literally dropped. "Your what?" "It's a recent development," Alexander said, unwilling to elaborate further in front of the girls. "I'll explain later." Lily, ever the protective one, stepped forward and looked Victor up and down with unmistakable suspicion. "Are you Dad's friend?" The word Dad clearly shocked Victor further. Before he could respond, an elderly resident whom the girls had been helping spoke up. "I'm not leaving without my photo albums," Mrs. Wilson insisted, clutching a worn handbag. "They're all I have left of Harold." "Where are they, Mrs. Wilson?" Zoe asked gently. "In my room, bottom drawer," the old woman replied, distress evident in her trembling voice. Victor cleared his throat impatiently. "Look, these people need to find somewhere else to go. Alex, we don't have time for this. The Tokyo call—" "These are people, not problems," Lily interrupted, her small chin raised defiantly. "My mom says everyone deserves help sometimes." Alexander felt a surge of pride at his daughter's courage, followed by shame at his partner's callousness. For the first time, he saw Victor through fresh eyes. The ruthless efficiency he'd once admired now seemed cold and hollow. "I'll get your albums, Mrs. Wilson," Alexander said, making a decision. He turned to Victor. "Call Tokyo and reschedule. Tell them I had a family emergency." "Family emergency?" Victor sputtered, his gaze darting to the triplets. "Since when do you have a family?" "Since right now," Alexander replied firmly, and this shelter has a crisis that needs immediate attention." "You can't be serious," Victor said, lowering his voice. "You're choosing this," he gestured at the shelter, "over a multi-billion-dollar deal." Alexander looked around at the residents being evacuated, at Darius organizing volunteers, at Sophia directing the effort with calm efficiency, and at his daughters helping wherever they could. Something shifted inside him, like tectonic plates realigning. "I'll call Tokyo myself later," he said to Victor, who stared at him as if he'd lost his mind. "Right now, I'm needed here." As Victor stormed out, Alexander turned to Darius. "Tell me exactly what this shelter needs, not just today, but long-term. I think I can help." Pulling out his phone, Alexander called his assistant. "Diane, clear my schedule for the next 2 weeks. I'm extending my stay in Chicago." He paused, watching his daughters help Mrs. Wilson. "It's a family matter." 2 days after Christmas, Alexander had claimed a corner of the shelter's administrative office as his temporary workspace. Laptop open, phone constantly buzzing, he toggled between video calls with his executive team and spreadsheets detailing the shelter's finances. The stark contrast between his corporate world and this new reality couldn't be more pronounced. "The building's structural assessment came back," Darius said, dropping a thick report on the desk. "It's worse than we thought. The foundation has water damage, the electrical system needs a complete overhaul, and the HVAC won't last another winter." Alexander rubbed his eyes. "What's the damage estimate?" $3.4 million for the essential repairs. Another $2 million if we want to expand the transitional housing section. Alexander nodded, making notes. He'd spent the past 48 hours immersed in the shelter's operations, identifying inefficiencies and opportunities with the same focus he'd once reserved for acquisitions. But this was different. The assets here were people, their lives hanging in the balance. His phone buzzed for the 10th time that hour. Victor again. Alexander sent it to voicemail. "You can take the call," Darius said, noticing the constant interruptions. "We've managed crises before." "It can wait," Alexander replied, though both men knew it probably couldn't. The Tokyo deal represented billions in potential revenue, and Alexander had barely participated in the negotiations since Christmas Eve. The office door opened, and Sophia appeared with the triplets in tow. "Look who's done with school," she announced. The girls had returned to their regular routine, despite the shelter's partial closure, attending the neighborhood elementary school, where Sophia had arranged reduced tuition years ago. They burst into the office with the boundless energy of 6-year-olds, their backpacks bouncing. "Dad, Dad," Maya called, rushing to Alexander with a drawing clutched in her hand. "Look what I made in art class today." The drawing showed 5 stick figures, 3 small ones and 2 tall ones, standing in front of what appeared to be the shelter. "Our family," Maya explained proudly. Alexander felt a lump form in his throat as he examined the crayon masterpiece. "It's beautiful, Maya. I'll hang it right here." He taped it carefully to the wall beside his laptop. Zoe approached next, more reserved, but equally curious. "What are you working on?" she asked, peering at his screen. "I'm trying to figure out how to fix the shelter," Alexander explained, surprised at how naturally he'd slipped into simple explanations with his daughters. Zoe studied the spreadsheet with unexpected comprehension. "Those are really big numbers." "Yes, they are," Alexander agreed, impressed by her observation. Lily hung back slightly, still the most cautious of the 3. "Are you coming to dinner tonight?" she asked. "Mom's making spaghetti." Alexander glanced at Sophia, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "I wouldn't miss it," he promised. As the girls settled at a small table in the corner to start their homework, Alexander's phone rang again. This time, it was Diane, his assistant. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Grant," she said when he answered, "but there's something you need to know immediately. There are discrepancies in the quarterly financial reports. Mr. Hayes has been shifting funds between accounts to hide losses in the European division." Alexander felt his stomach tighten. "How bad?" "Potentially $40 million, sir. The board is asking questions. Mr. Hayes told them you were fully aware and had authorized the transactions." The revelation hit Alexander like a physical blow. Victor wasn't just trying to pull him back to work. He was covering up serious financial mismanagement and using Alexander's absence as cover. Send me everything, Alexander said quietly, conscious of his daughters nearby, and schedule an emergency call with the board for tonight. Just as he hung up, Zoe approached with a sheet of paper. Dad, can you help me with my science project? It's about electricity and circuits. Alexander checked his watch. The board call would need to happen within hours to prevent further damage. The Tokyo investors were waiting. Victor's deception needed to be addressed immediately. But looking into Zoe's eager eyes, his eyes, Alexander remembered the science presentations he'd loved as a child, how his own father had always been too busy to attend. What time is your presentation? He asked. Tomorrow at 3 o'clock, Zoe replied. I'm demonstrating how parallel circuits work. I'll be there, Alexander promised, already mentally rescheduling his crisis management. The office door burst open again, this time revealing a frantic shelter volunteer. The temporary funding from the city fell through, she announced. They're saying we need to vacate completely by next week. Sophia exchanged an alarmed look with Darius. That's impossible. We have nowhere to move the remaining residents. Alexander's phone buzzed with yet another message from Victor. Emergency board call in 30 minutes. Your absence will be noted as abandonment of duties. Looking from his phone to the worried faces around him, Alexander felt pulled between two worlds that seemed impossible to reconcile. The corporate empire he'd built was potentially crumbling from within, while the shelter, and by extension, his daughter's stable home, faced imminent closure. Dad? Zoe asked, her voice small. You're still coming tomorrow, right? Of course, Alexander replied automatically, though uncertainty gnawed at him. I wouldn't miss it for anything. The next afternoon found Alexander at the Chicago Museum of Science and Industry with Zoe, whose eyes sparkled with excitement as they explored the electricity exhibit. Her science presentation had gone perfectly. Alexander had arrived early, sitting proudly in the back of the classroom as she demonstrated her circuit board to impressed classmates. This is the Tesla coil, Zoe explained, pointing to the massive device. It creates electrical arcs using electromagnetic force. Her explanation was remarkably sophisticated for a 6-year-old. Your knowledge is impressive, Alexander said. You remind me of myself at your age. Zoe beamed at the comparison. Mom says I get my brain from you. They moved through the museum at Zoe's pace, Alexander answering her endless questions about how things worked. For the first time in years, maybe decades, he wasn't checking his phone or thinking about business. He was simply present, connecting with his daughter through their shared fascination with how the world worked. The weekend brought similar outings with the other girls. On Saturday, Alexander took Maya to an art class where they painted pottery together. His business-trained precision was no match for Maya's creative freedom, and he found himself laughing as she encouraged him to make a bigger mess with the colors. Sunday afternoon found him on the sidelines of Lily's youth soccer practice, cheering as she raced down the field with surprising athleticism. Of the three, Lily remained the most reserved with him, but he saw her checking the sidelines to make sure he was watching. She's been practicing that move all week, Sophia said, appearing beside him with coffee. Wanted to make sure she got it right when you were here. Alexander accepted the cup, grateful for the peace offering it represented. They're incredible, Sophia. You've done an amazing job with them. They're adjusting to you better than I expected, she admitted. Even Lily, though she won't show it as openly. Their conversation was interrupted by his phone. Victor again. Alexander silenced it, having spent every night since the board meeting damage controlling the financial situation remotely. He'd managed to prevent immediate disaster, but the company needed his physical presence soon. Your mother called the shelter office yesterday, Sophia said casually. Apparently, she's coming to Chicago tomorrow. Alexander nearly choked on his coffee. My mother? Isabella Grant doesn't make spontaneous trips. She does when she hears rumors about grandchildren, Sophia replied. She was quite determined. I'll handle it, Alexander assured her, though anxiety coiled in his stomach. Isabella Grant was a formidable woman who had raised Alexander with the same cool efficiency with which she ran her investment firm. Her approval had always been conditional on success. As they watched Lily score a goal, Alexander realized something profound had changed within him. A week ago, his mother's judgment would have been his primary concern. Now, as he watched his daughter's triumphant grin, he found he cared far more about Lily's approval than Isabella's. That evening, the five of them ate dinner together in Sophia's apartment, the first time they'd done so without the heightened emotions of revelation or crisis. Alexander had brought the ingredients and cooked, revealing a surprising talent in the kitchen. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" Sophia asked as she helped clear plates. "Cooking videos during international flights," Alexander admitted. "I never actually used the skills until now." As the girls got ready for bed, Alexander helped Maya hang her new artwork on the refrigerator. When she spontaneously hugged him goodnight, he felt a connection that no business success had ever provided. "Will you be here tomorrow?" Maya asked sleepily. "Yes," Alexander promised, tucking her in beside her sisters in their shared bedroom. "I have something special planned for all of us." Later, standing in the shelter's parking lot with Sophia, Alexander felt more clarity than he had in years, despite the complications swirling around him. "I'm not just visiting, Sophia," he said quietly. "I want to be part of their daily lives, not just weekends and special occasions. I'm looking at properties in the neighborhood." Sophia's expression was guarded. "Alexander, you can't just uproot your entire life on a week's impulse. Your company is in New York." "Companies can be run from anywhere," he replied. "Families can't." As if on cue, his phone buzzed with a message from the board. "Final decision required by Friday. Return to headquarters immediately, or face removal as CEO." The Grant Hayes Technologies headquarters in New York occupied the top 10 floors of a gleaming skyscraper in Manhattan. Alexander's corner office on the 50th floor offered panoramic views of the city he'd once considered the center of his universe. Now, as he straightened his tie before entering the emergency board meeting, the view felt strangely distant, as if belonging to someone else's life. "The board members are all present," his assistant informed him, handing him a folder of financial documents. "Mr. Hayes has been presenting for the past 20 minutes. Alexander nodded, steeling himself. He'd flown in that morning on the company jet, promising the triplets he'd return for the shelter's reopening celebration. The following day, the look of uncertainty in Lily's eyes had haunted him throughout the flight. Inside the boardroom, 14 executives in impeccable suits sat around a massive table. Victor stood at the head, mid-presentation, his confident demeanor faltering slightly when Alexander entered. "Ah, here he is," Victor recovered quickly. "Alexander, we were just discussing the leadership vacuum that's developed over the past 2 weeks." Alexander took his seat at the opposite end of the table. "I apologize for my delayed arrival. Please continue, Victor." "As I was saying," Victor resumed, clicking to a slide showing declining stock projections, "Alexander's unexpected family situation has created instability within the company. The Tokyo deal is now at risk, European operations are showing concerning patterns, and investor confidence is wavering." Several board members nodded in agreement. Alexander noticed his ally count was dangerously low. "While personal matters are certainly important," Victor continued with practiced sympathy, "the responsibility of leading a global corporation with over 15,000 employees must take precedence. I'm proposing a temporary leadership transition while Alexander addresses his situation." The transparent power grab wasn't surprising, but the board's receptive expressions were. Alexander had built this company from nothing, yet 2 weeks of absence had apparently eroded 15 years of loyalty. "Before we vote on any leadership changes," Alexander said calmly, standing to address the room, "I'd like to present some information that directly affects this decision." For the next 30 minutes, Alexander methodically outlined the financial discrepancies he'd discovered in Victor's European management. The room grew increasingly tense as he presented evidence of misrepresentation, fund transfers, and deliberate accounting manipulations. "These aren't simple errors," Alexander concluded. "They represent a pattern of deception designed to hide nearly $40 million in losses while artificially inflating Victor's division performance." The board erupted in questions and accusations. Victor's face flushed with anger as he attempted to defend himself, claiming Alexander had approved the transactions, a claim quickly disproven by documented evidence. As the chaos unfolded, Alexander felt a strange detachment. 2 weeks ago, this corporate drama would have consumed him completely. Now, his thoughts kept returning to Chicago, to 3 little girls who were expecting him to help decorate the newly renovated shelter for tomorrow's reopening. His phone vibrated with a text from Sophia. "Girls finished their posters for tomorrow. Lily asking if you're really coming back." In that moment, looking at Victor's desperate maneuvering and the board's shocked faces, Alexander made a decision that surprised even himself. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice cutting through the arguments, "regardless of today's revelations about Mr. Hayes, I've come to an important conclusion about the future of this company and my role within it." The room fell silent as Alexander moved to the center of the table. "I'm stepping down as CEO of Grant Hayes Technologies, effective immediately." Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Even Victor looked stunned. "This is not a decision made in haste," Alexander continued. "I founded this company 15 years ago with a vision of technological innovation that would change the world. We've achieved that. But in pursuing that vision, I lost sight of what truly matters." He paused, thinking of Zoe's analytical mind, Maya's creative spirit, and Lily's cautious heart. "I'm not abandoning the company. I'll remain on the board and as an innovation advisor. But the daily leadership needs someone who can give it their complete focus. That's no longer me." Alexander, one of the longest-serving board members, spoke up. "Is this about these financial discrepancies? Because we can address those without such a drastic step." "No," Alexander replied honestly. "It's about priorities. My family needs me present in a way this position doesn't allow, and I need them more than I need this title." Victor, recovering from his shock, attempted to salvage his position. "This is clearly an emotional decision. Perhaps we should table any leadership changes until—" "My decision is final," Alexander interrupted firmly. "As for Mr. Hayes, I leave his fate to the board after a full audit. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a plane to catch. My daughters are expecting me." As Alexander walked out of the boardroom, leaving the stunned executives behind, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. His phone buzzed with another message from Sophia, this one including a photo of the triplets holding their handmade welcome signs for the shelter celebration. For the first time in his adult life, Alexander Grant was running towards something, not from it. The shelter had been transformed. What was once a crumbling building with leaking pipes and failing systems was now a comprehensive resource center with modern transitional housing, a job training facility, childcare services, and educational programs. The sign above the entrance read, "Hope Harbor Family Center," with smaller text beneath, "A Grant Foundation Initiative." "Impressive, isn't it?" Darius said, joining Alexander in the doorway. "Hard to believe this is the same place you stumbled into during a blizzard." Alexander nodded, watching as Lily confidently showed a group of community leaders through the family housing section. At 7 years old, she carried herself with remarkable poise, explaining the center's mission, as if she'd been doing it all her life. "The girls have really taken ownership," Alexander observed proudly. "They've been part of every step," Darius agreed. "Lily's community outreach ideas, Maya's arts program, and Zoe's tech lab for the residents. They're quite the trio." Across the room, Maya was showing visitors the colorful mural she'd helped design for the children's area, while Zoe enthusiastically demonstrated the computer lab where residents could learn digital skills and search for jobs. The past 6 months had brought changes Alexander could never have imagined. After stepping down as CEO, he'd established the Grant Foundation, focusing on creating sustainable solutions for homelessness across the country. He'd purchased a brownstone just 3 blocks from the center, where the girls spent half their time. The other half, they lived with Sophia in their newly renovated apartment in the center's staff housing. His phone buzzed with a message from his assistant, not Diane, who had stayed with Grant Hayes, but Marcella, a former shelter resident with exceptional organizational skills, whom Alexander had hired to run the foundation's day-to-day operations. The mayor's office confirmed attendance at the ribbon cutting, VIP guests arriving in 30 minutes. Alexander texted back a quick acknowledgement before scanning the room for Sophia. He found her in the new counseling wing, arranging brochures about the center's mental health services. The past months had softened the barriers between them, as co-parenting gradually evolved into friendship, and recently, something more. "Need help?" he offered, joining her. Sophia looked up with a smile that still made his heart skip. "Just finishing up." "The girls are natural tour guides, aren't they?" They're amazing, Alexander agreed. I keep thinking about how close I came to never knowing them. Before Sophia could respond, a familiar voice called from the entrance. Well, this is certainly not what I expected when I heard my son was abandoning his company for charity work. Isabella Grant, elegant as always in a tailored suit, surveyed the center with a critical eye. In the months since their tense first meeting with the girls, Alexander's mother had undergone her own transformation. Initially dismissive of Alexander's midlife crisis, she had gradually come to respect the depth of his commitment. Today was her first visit to the completed center. "Mother," Alexander greeted her with a kiss on the cheek. "I'm glad you could make it." "I wouldn't miss my granddaughter's big day," Isabella replied, her tone warming as she spotted the triplets across the room. "They've grown since Christmas." The girls, noticing their grandmother, rushed over with excitement. Even Lily, once wary of the formidable woman, now accepted Isabella's affectionate greeting. "Grandma, did you see the library we designed?" Maya asked, tugging her hand. "Not yet, dear. Why don't you show me?" Isabella allowed herself to be led away by the excited girls. As guests began arriving for the official opening, Alexander was surprised to see a familiar face among them. Victor Hayes, looking somewhat diminished without his executive swagger, approached cautiously. "Quite an operation you've built here," Victor said, extending his hand. "More impressive than I expected." Alexander accepted the handshake, noting the changes in his former partner. After the financial revelations, Victor had avoided criminal charges by cooperating fully with the investigation, but his career at Grant Hayes was over. "What brings you to Chicago?" Alexander asked. Victor shrugged. "Job interview, actually. A tech startup focusing on educational software for underserved communities." He looked around the center. "Your foundation's work got me thinking about different ways to measure success." Before Alexander could respond, the girls returned with Isabella and immediately noticed Victor. "You're the man who was mean at the shelter during the flood," Lily observed bluntly, her protective instincts flaring. Victor had the grace to look embarrassed. "I was," he admitted. "I was wrong about a lot of things that day." Zoe studied him with her analytical gaze. "People can change," she said matter-of-factly. "Dad did." The simple truth from his daughter's lip made Alexander smile. As the time for the official ceremony approached, he gathered with Sophia and the girls near the podium. Mayor Collins had arrived to cut the ribbon, and local news cameras were setting up. "Nervous?" Sophia asked quietly, straightening his tie. "Oddly, no," Alexander replied. 6 months ago, I would have been terrified of stepping away from the corporate world. Now it feels like the most natural decision I ever made. The ceremony began with speeches from community leaders in Darius, who told the story of Hope Harbor's transformation. When it was Alexander's turn to speak, he approached the podium with his daughters beside him. 6 months ago, I came to the old Hope Harbor shelter during a blizzard, thinking I was there for a simple PR opportunity," Alexander began. "What I found instead was my family and a new purpose." He looked at the triplets, then at Sophia, whose eyes shone with pride and something deeper. "Success is traditionally measured in profits and acquisitions. I spent decades chasing those metrics, accumulating wealth while my life remained empty. Then 3 extraordinary little girls taught me that true wealth isn't counted in dollars, but in moments, connections, and the difference we make in others' lives." As applause filled the room, Alexander announced the foundation's next phase, funding for similar centers in 5 more cities by year's end. The crowd cheered, cameras flashed, and reporters raised hands with questions. But for Alexander, the most important reaction came from Lily, who slipped her hand into his and whispered, "We're proud of you, Dad." It was, he reflected as he squeezed her small hand, the only measure of success that truly mattered. Has someone unexpected changed your life's direction? Or have you ever discovered that what you thought you wanted isn't what you needed? Share your story in the comments, subscribe for more life-changing journeys, and remember, sometimes our greatest blessings come disguised as our biggest challenges.